Harry accused of bribing DHS Jimmy $1 million to block expedited release of his visa records in drug use lawsuit. The DHS has rejected a request by Conservative Heritage Foundation to expedite a Freedom of Information Act request by the think tank for the release of the immigration records of the Duke of Sussex. DHS Senior Director Jimmy Wolfrey wrote in a letter that, to extent records exist, this office does not find a public interest in disclosure sufficient to override the subject's privacy interests. The Heritage Foundation has argued that Prince Harry's past admissions of drug use, such as in his memoir Spare, make him ineligible for a U.S. visa. DHS notified the think tank on Tuesday, 1 week after being ordered to respond to the request by D.C. Federal Court Judge Carl Nichols. Heritage lawyer Samuel Dewey told the paper that the reply from DHS shows an appalling lack of transparency by the Biden administration. The Department of Homeland Security's efforts to stonewall the Heritage Foundation's Freedom of Information request are unacceptable, and we will be contesting their position. We expected to have a fight every step of this case in federal court, and we will continue to press for transparency and accountability for the American people. The director of the Heritage Foundation's Oversight Project, Mike Howell, submitted the request on March 8th, requesting records from DHS, Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Office of Biometric Identity Management. Ahead of the hearing on 6th of June, only DHS had yet to respond. The other three things agencies rejected the request. The Heritage Foundation's request for a preliminary injunction has withdrawn as moot on 14th June following the reply from DHS. Quote, "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of any records relating to your request under Section 3, pursuant of FOIA exemptions and other exemptions. Exemption B6 exempts from disclosure personnel or medical files and similar files, the release of which could cause a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. The privacy interests of the individual in the records you have requested outweigh any minimal public interest in disclosure of the information. Exemption B7C excludes records or information compiled for law enforcement purposes, but only to the extent that the production of such materials could reasonably be expected to constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. To the extent records exist, this office does not find a public interest in disclosure sufficient to override the subject's privacy interest." Judge Nichols is now set to decide how to proceed with the case. At the hearing last week, the department argued that an injunction to force the DHS to expedite the request should not go ahead, as the foundation hasn't shown how they will suffer irreparable harm if the information is not shared. Representing the government, Assistant U.S. Attorney John Bardo argued on June 6 that it wouldn't make a difference when the request was handled, even if the response came a year from now. The Heritage Foundation said the interest on Prince Harry's immigration status would increase over time. Large parts of the hearing centered on the amount of media attention on Harry and his supposed drug use, which some legal experts say could have barred him from entering the U.S. The Heritage Foundation has suggested that the federal government may have been engaging in favoritism and may have turned a blind eye to his actions, which may have caused the authorities to reject the visa application. The foundation also argued that the public should be allowed to see Prince Harry's immigration records to see if he may have provided untruthful answers. Mr. Bardo argued that sufficient coverage from mainstream U.S. media was required for a request to be expedited. He mentioned outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and TV networks. Heritage lawyer Samuel Dewey, meanwhile, argued in front of Judge Carl Nichols that DHS regulations simply say media without specifying where the outlets are based. Mr. Dewey told The Independent after the hearing that you can't define mainstream. That's almost absurd in this context. So as a policy matter, that is a very alarming statement for the press and for transparency for the administration.